It's everything reinstalling Windows.
Because sometimes that's the only way to fix Windows.
Yeah, but if you have like a little malware and they just reinstall the whole thing, it's a no-no without backing up data.
Yeah, malware happens all the time with Windows.
Linux?
Well, it can happen too. I mean, I'm not saying Linux cannot get malware. It's just not as frequently. All right, it is time. I'm gonna start the recorder. It is already started. Double check the volume. It's recording. That's good. All right. So I'm gonna start today's lecture, and we'll start with something that some of you have been waiting for a long time, like 6 weeks. Where's my first programming assignment? Well, here it comes. And for people who took my cisp360 class, it's not going to be too big of a deal. I'm hoping. Okay, so here's the programming assignment. What it's going to do is to find the maximum of a certain number of integers. Okay, so it's not very difficult. So the way you do it is you first download a zip file, which contains a folder, and in the folder is a C++ program for you to start with. Okay, so don't start from scratch. Don't start with an empty project with nothing in it. Start with this particular program. So I'm going to download it first, and I'll show you what it looks like in that zip file. So let me switch to a particular folder. I can do it this way. Okay. And it's inside my downloads folder. And I'll just go ahead and unzip it. And the file name is control. That's it, control structure. So when you unzip control, in Windows you just double click it and it will show you the content. It has one subfolder called control, and in the subfolder will be 2 files. The first file is the only one that you need. You can delete the second one if you want to. The first one is just main.cpp, which is the source file that you should start with. The second one is an executable. I'm just using it to test whether the program is working the way it's supposed to. So you can delete the second one, especially if you run Windows. There's definitely no use of the second file. So if you go into the folder control and take a look at main.cpp, this is your starting point. And your starting point looks kind of complicated. So you can basically ignore everything up to this comment here. Insert your code below this line and do it, and insert your code above this line. So you have your basically boundaries, okay? So your code can only be between these 2 lines of comments. The rest of the program looks kind of difficult, kind of looks hairy, and that's because that's my code to make this program does what it is supposed to. Okay, or at least get everything ready for you so that you can get the part that is just finding the maximum of 4 variables. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. So the rest of this program, which is kind of complicated from the perspective of this class, is really all it does is to read from the command line itself 4 integers, and it will store those 4 integers into W, X, Y, and Z. So you will be given, by the time it gets to your code, you are guaranteed that W, X, Y, and Z as integer variables will have some values already initialized. Your job is to write the logic to find the maximum of these 4 variables and store that maximum into the next variable, max. So max is already here, it is already declared, it does not have an initial value. You are supposed to figure out what is the maximum and store that value into max as a variable. You don't have to print a single thing because my code will also do the printing. So your code is supposed to just to do the logic to find the maximum and store. Are there any questions about what your program is supposed to do? Okay. Yep.
Where is this located under?
It is under the control structure topic. The last part of it has the assignment, find the maximum. All right. Are there any questions about what your job is, what you're supposed to do? No question. Yeah, go ahead.
Do we have to like put input for numbers?
Yep. I'll show you how to run the
Okay.
program. Okay. To run this program, depending on what environment you're using, if you're running it the same way that I'm running here from the command line, everything is done on the command line. You just have to compile the program. Okay. I always compile with -G because in case I need to go into GDB, this gives me a way to get into it. The output is main, and the source file is main.cpp. Now, obviously, since I've been preaching it all along in this class, you might as well turn on, warn all, and also pedantic. Okay, just to make sure the compiler warns you about everything that can possibly be warned about. Okay, and it will give you one particular warning and say that maximum is not initialized because it is not. Okay, because it is your code, your job, to initialize max or give it a value that is the maximum of the 4 integers that are given to you. But to run the program, you just have to run the executable and then give it 4 numbers right after main itself or whatever name you want to call the executable. So you can just say 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? And in this case, it returns with a maximum of blah 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 because it's not initialized. Okay? But your program should change the logic so that it prints 4 in this case because the maximum of 1, 2, 3, and 4 is 4. When you run the program like this, let's say 4, 4, 4, 4, then it should also print 4 because the maximum of 4, 4, 4, 4 is just 4. It's both the maximum and the minimum in that case. Are we doing okay so far? Yep.
Are we supposed to write a code that limits the user to the input? So like if you try to input 5 numbers, it'll say...
That's already checked for you.
Okay.
I got that part done.
Okay.
So if you run the program without anything, it complains and say not enough parameters provided, you should provide 4 integers. If you give it anything other than integers like ABC, it tells you ABC is not a number.
Can you do negatives?
You can enter in negative numbers.
Decimals?
Negative numbers are okay. Decimal numbers are not because they're not integers.
Oh, good.
And you can also give it too many numbers, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it complains too many parameters on the command line. So all the error checking stuff is already done for you. By the time you get to insert code here, you are guaranteed that you only have 4 integers, all right? Yeah, all 4 will be initialized. Okay? Any other questions? So for those of you who are curious, you can try to read my code. I don't really mind that at all, but do it after you turn in your homework. Okay, because otherwise that can take up a little bit of time. Okay. Any other questions? No other questions? Go ahead.
I guess just for further clarification, could you just repeat the assignment exactly?
Sorry?
For further clarification, could you just go over it again? Exactly what we're going to do individually.
Can I go over the assignment itself?
Just repeat the assignment. That'd be all right.
You want me to replay the video?
Yeah, that's fine. I'll check.
I mean, is there any particular point that you want me to clarify? I mean, that's what I'm asking.
No, just probably read it later.
Okay. Okay.
So you can write it any way you want as long as...
That is correct. You can use any control structure that you feel will basically get this done. I can give you a few options, right? I mean, conditional statements, ternary operators. You can roll the entire thing into one single expression. I'm not kidding. Okay, you can roll the whole program, everything that you're supposed to do, into max equals to something something question mark something 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 colon something something, and then each one of those something something may contain question mark and colon as well. So you can do it that way if you want to. You can implement this as a series of conditional statements. You can also implement it as a nested conditional statement. Okay, like a conditional statement inside another conditional statement inside another conditional statement. There are many ways to do this. So I'm not expecting the same implementation of this entire class. Okay, there are just so many ways to organize this program. The ordering of the conditional statements, the ordering of the conditions, the use of conjunction versus disjunction. There are so many ways that are all correct to get this done. So, well, except for people who took my class in cisp 300, because they can copy and paste some of the programs that we have done in the past and use it as a starting point, because we never really talked about how to find the maximum of 4 variables. Yep.
Is there a preferred way, or a way that's going to give us the max points, or?
No, any correct way will give you the maximum number of points. So I'm going to talk about how I will score this particular assignment. For those of you who are standing, do you want to get a chair? I mean, you guys can come grab a chair and at least have a place to sit down. I think I just pulled 3 out, so that's what you need. All right, so, okay, yeah. So what to turn in is, after you are done, you have to zip the entire control folder, okay? Not just main.cpp, but the entire control folder, which is basically what you did in the first homework assignment. Turn in and submit your zip file. How you want to name your zip file is okay, that part is entirely up to you. How this is going to be graded, the grade is partially based on conformance to my instruction. In other words, did you turn in a zip file or did you just turn in a CPP file? Does the zip file include the folder control and just that, okay? It's not like 20 folders or 20 directories down from the top of the zip file. Does the folder control include the file main.cpp? You can have additional files. I'm not going to take any points off if you have all kinds of object files, test files, and whatnot. Not a problem, okay? I'm just looking for main.cpp. And does the code that you insert print anything? You're not supposed to, okay? I know how some people are fond of the concept of using printf or cout to debug a program. As much as I do not like that idea, you guys can like it and use it. Just don't leave that code behind when you turn in your homework, okay? Because if the program doesn't print just max using my code and it prints something else and messes up my grading script, I will take points off. Because it takes me extra time to fix it and grade it. So it's gonna cost you some points. Not a whole lot, because all the conformance stuff is only 5 points. The majority of your points will be, does it work? It's based on whether it works or not, and that's 15 out of 20 points. So I will give your program a lot of test cases, okay? And if it works on all of the test cases that I can throw at your program, you get all 15 points out of 20 out of this category. If it fails on some, then you get partial credit. It's just the number, it's the proportion that is important. If your program works on 1/3 of the test cases, you get 5 points out of the 15. If your program works on, let's say, 2/3 of all the test cases, you get 10 points out of the 15 points. Okay, it's really just that. Okay, proportion. Any questions about how your assignment will be graded? Yep.
Sorry, for clarification, literally all we have to do, say if we're doing conditional statements, the only thing we need to do is put the if statement in there. We don't need to, all we have to do is close off that statement, and then, I see that the return's there, you won't even have to do that either.
That is correct, because I have done the prefix or to prepare for the variables, and I have my code to print the maximum out, which is what my script is expecting. So those 2 parts are done already. You just have to deal with the logic to make the maximum of the 4 variables. Any other questions? Yep.
I just ran it, just for me. Basically, it says that not enough parameters. Do you enter parameters and we devise the logic, or
you have to enter the parameters as a part of the command itself? So you say main and then followed by 4 numbers. I'm not sure how to do it in code blocks. I'm pretty sure it's doable. I just don't know how exactly to do it.
Okay.
So you might have to run it on the command line, from the command line to make it easy. Because code blocks will eventually give you an executable anyway. You have to find out where the executable is, which is usually in the same folder. I'm gonna give it a try, okay? So I'm just gonna run it from code blocks, just so that I know what it is like, to use code blocks.
Please.
Even though I drive a Civic, sometimes I want to feel how a Ferrari feels like. More like Winnebago in this case. Yeah, where's the kitchen sink? Oh, it's right back there. Which one you talk about? We got two in the Winnebago. Okay, so in this one we have to import a project. That's not gonna work, is it?
You can open
I can just open a particular
Yes.
folder.
and choose the one.
Well, let's see if we can get it to work. So we want to go to the downloads folder. Go to control, and here's my source code.
Maintenance. Yeah.
Click open. Okay, so at least it opens. And then we'll go to build.
Now run
and it builds okay, right?
it. Yeah.
Process terminated with status 0. Okay, this is something that I'm gonna explain, like just to make sure that you guys know what it means. When a Linux system comes back and say process terminated with a status of 0, 0 is good. Okay, if a program terminates with a status of 0, it means it did not encounter any problems. Okay, anything other than 0 typically means it did not finish okay. Okay, it encountered some problem in the process. So in this case, it did finish okay. So let's see if we can run it with a parameter. Okay, so it ran, and this time it terminated with status 255, which is problematic, and it's not running. Just okay. So now we have to find out how to run it with parameters.
Would it be under the build messages tab on the right of build log?
The building part is fine. It's just when we are running it, it did not run okay. If you're using code blocks, one way to make sure that your program works correctly is not to observe the output, but to put a breakpoint here. Just put a breakpoint at this point, add breakpoint. So when you run your program in debug mode, no, I just want the default. That's fine. So when you run it with debugger. You have to use a project for that? Okay, so how do I turn this into a project? One way to do it is to just make your own usual project and copy main.cpp over. That would for sure work.
Or you can create a project and then add file.
Right. Oh, you can add the main.cpp file to the project. But I thought the project always starts with its own, main.cpp. Doesn't have to be that way.
I think
It's
it's blank.
blank. Yeah, it is blank. So you have to overwrite the original main.cpp file with the file that you download. Yeah. Okay. So that's another way to do it. Did everybody get that part? How to use, code blocks? How to use a project? No. Okay. I will do this again. Okay. So I'm gonna close it, not save anything, and remove my folder here. So I'm starting from scratch at this point, okay? I'm not using any code that I have already downloaded or seen at this point. So what I'll do is I have to go to code blocks first. Even though I'm using Linux, the process will be about the same in Windows. And here I'm gonna start a new project and make it as simple as possible. So we'll make this a console project. Console project.
Console application.
Where? Oh, console application. Here, C++. And you want to name it control, just so that the folder that is created is also control. So click next. We want to use GCC as a compiler. Create debug configuration. That's good. Release, not so much. You can uncheck this one if you want to. And then we say finish. and that will automatically give you a main.cpp, which is not the one that you want to use. Okay, so at this point there are two things you can do. You can either open up the other text file, just copy and paste and overwrite this file, or you can replace the entire file, if you want to. So that's basically your choice. How do you want to do it? So I'm just going to show you one way of doing it. So one way to do it is just to download this file and just click open the file. Use your favorite zip opening utility program to do it. I may not have one in Linux. Yeah, I don't have a GUI for opening up zip files. Okay, so without that, I'm just going to use another way to do this. I will go to my downloads folder and manually unzip the folder. Unzip the zip file. So that will give me the same thing back, which is control as a folder, and then inside the folder I have main.cpp. So I'm gonna use mousepad to just open up the text file here. Do a Control A to select all, Control C to copy, switch back to code blocks. There's code blocks right there, and then just replace this entire program. Do a Control V, and now we have the given code in code blocks as a part of your project. Is that okay so far? Okay. So now you have a starting point in code blocks. So once you're in code blocks, what you want to do is first let's double check and make sure it builds first. So yep, it's complaining about the same thing. Max may be used uninitialized in this function, which is okay. That's exactly the same error message or warning message that we saw earlier. So for the most part, the program should run. What you want to do is to run in the debugger. If you want to check whether your program works or not, is to run it in the debugger. Put a breakpoint here. Okay, so put a breakpoint on the line that says C out max and an end line. That's where maximum should be set correctly by your code. Okay, so when you run your program like this, go to debug and say start. Yeah, sure. The program should have started. Is it starting it? Run to cursor. Nope. Saw some error messages.
Maybe if you go to the debugger tab on the bottom, you'll see it.
Cannot launch console xterm. Okay, I don't have xterm installed. That's why. I have XFCE4 terminal, which is not xterm, so that's why it's having problem with just xterm. Let me quickly fix that problem so that we can at least see what's going to happen in your case. So,
Roblox gives you so much problems, huh?
it's Winnebago.
Why do they even have it on Linux?
Sorry?
Why do you even have it on Linux?
Why do I have? C4 terminal. Okay, that should do it. Okay, let's try again. Debug, start. No, still doesn't like it. Still cannot find xterm. That's what it's complaining. But basically, if you do it in Windows, that should work. So if you can get your first program to work, this one should work as well. Worst case scenario, what can you do? Well, worst case scenario is to go to build and then open up a CMD command line interface in Windows, navigate to the folder, and then run that program from your DOS command. I mean, that's a sure way that it has to work. All right. Any questions? Does anyone want me to dual boot into Windows and kind of talk about how to do it in Windows.
Can you do it with the command prompt for the Windows?
Huh?
With the CMD?
The
How do I-
CMD cannot be recorded. Oh wait, I can't do that. Okay, so here comes the other part, and I will only do it once. Okay, I will only do this once because it's time consuming and it's. Yeah. All right, so what I'll do is I'm gonna go to mount this folder here. This is going to be funny. Some of you will really like this. So I'm gonna go to media, user, backup, my name, go to Win7, and then do a VM7.sh. I'm gonna do this in a emulator. So I'm running Windows in an emulator so that I can run code blocks in Windows to show you guys how to get this homework assignment done. And you might ask, but why do you do this? Because I can. Yeah.
If you use code blocks to do this assignment, will it give that X-term thing that you were talking about?
Not in Windows.
Okay, so
Yeah, Windows understand it doesn't have Xterm. It would just use a DOS box, what we call a DOS box, which is just CMD.
But that won't cause any problems when we submit it for you to run on your.
As long as your main.cpp is still what I'm expecting, it should not cause any problems.
Yeah, I get debugger finished with status 0.
Okay.
But whenever I run it, it just pops out the window, not enough parameters.
Yeah, there
provided.
is a way to fix that. I'll show you guys how to fix that. You can supply parameters when you're starting the debugger.
Because I'm looking like, where's the CN to put in the parameters or something like that.
Okay, so we are doing this in Windows. Alright, so we'll go to the homework assignment, which is cisp360. This is under control structures. The last link of control structures is the homework assignment. And in Windows, if you download a zip file, you can open it directly from inside Windows using Windows Explorer. So that makes it a lot easier. Okay, so now we have control, and inside control is my CPP source file. So now I switch back to code blocks. So find out where code blocks is installed. Start up code blocks. Give it a blank, simple console project. Interestingly, inside the emulator, Windows starts up faster than when it's starting up from the internal hard drive when it's installed. Even though my external hard drive is connected by USB 2.0, it's still faster than the internal hard drive. It's pathetic. It's really, really sad that an installed operating system is running slower than when it is emulated and the mass store is connected only by a USB 2.0 device, not even 3.0. Alright, so let's go ahead and start with this one. So once again, you start a new project, just make it a console application in the case of Windows. Click go, C++ is good. Name the project control, because that will also determine the folder name. And once you have that, make sure you have GCC. You can keep everything as the default, okay? And click finish. And once you are done with finish, it will give you the sources, which is main.cpp. Double click, open that file, and then go back to here and open this one also. I believe you can open it again in code blocks. It should not interfere. Yep, because it opens it up as a new tab. So you do a Control A, Control C, close this one so you don't get confused which one is which one. Do another Control A over here and do a Control V to overwrite it. So now you have everything done. Make sure you save it first so that you don't lose it. And now you can debug your program. So let's go ahead and find out how to specify parameters when you are debugging a program like this. And if we cannot do it that way, there are always other ways to do it. So the one way that I recommend doing is not to use printing, not to run the program on a command line, is just to put a breakpoint at this point here, because whatever max is going to be printed here. So you don't really need to run it in the terminal to find out what it's printing, because it's just whatever the value of max is. So at this point, you'll run debug, and it should run all the way to the breakpoint. Go. Yep. Perspective has changed. Do you want to save it? Yeah, go ahead. And it cannot get to this point because I cannot specify the parameters. Alright, so let's go back to the project itself and see if we can specify the parameters. So we go to project, build option, properties, go to properties of the project, debugger, search direction, remote debugging, additional GDB command, before connection, after connection, additional shell commands, before, after, no, that's not what I want.
Is that recording?
Yeah, it's being recorded,
Okay, nice.
because I'm still in Linux.
Good.
It's just a holodeck in Linux. Okay, if it is so hard to do it this way, there's another way to do it. Okay, so take note of where the folder is. Okay, the folder is always reflected down here. So it's under C:\users\users.lwt\documents control. So take note of that. Start a command line interface. Okay, so just go to click on the Windows icon and type CMD. Okay, that's basically the quote-unquote terminal in Windows, and then you just navigate to that folder. Okay, CD to documents, CD to control, and inside control, bad habit of mine, ls instead of dir. So inside here we have two folders. One is bin and one is obj. Go to bin, another ls, great. Go to debug, do another dir, and then we have control.exe. That is our executable. So run it directly from the command line at this point. So you just say control, and it will give you the error message because I did not give it any number to process. So now you can say control 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, it gives me -2 because it just so happens that an initialized max in this case starts with a value of -2. Okay, that's one way to debug your program. Any questions? But you won't be able to use the debugger in this case. There has to be a way to specify parameters when you're running the program. It's just a matter of finding the right place, or I can use a shortcut and just Google. So we'll ask code blocks specify command parameters. There we go. How to take command line arguments in code blocks. Click. Answer. Oh, okay, stretching. Alright. Answers, 3 of them. Go to project set programs arguments. That seems intuitive. Let's check it out. Go to project and set programs arguments. Duh. Okay, so now we can just go ahead and specify the arguments. I think this may be one line with each one, so we'll just give it 1, 2, 3, 4 like that, and click OK, and run it in the debugger. Yep, that worked. Is that okay? Does everybody saw what I did? Yep. Oh. So just to show you guys how the way I did it, you go to project, and then you go to set programs arguments, and then you just give it the numbers as the program's argument. You can have one item or one number per line, or you can have one line to have all 4 numbers. It seems to work exactly the same way. So when you test a program, you might want to test it with different test cases, but this is how you can change it. Yep.
What is the first thing you pressed?
Project. So it's under the project menu, and then under there you can go to set programs arguments, And then inside there, you can either change it in debug or release, but I suspect most people are debugging the program, so you should use the debug target, and then just change it here. Yep.
And now the run button doesn't work after you do that?
Yeah, it worked. See, I'm already in the program. It's already being debugged.
Mm-hmm, that's what I got. Now let's run the project.
Project? You mean in debug?
The
start,
build
right?
and run. Yeah. Here.
Because I'm debugging right now.
Oh, it's still debugging?
Yeah, I'm
How
still
do you get
debugging.
out
If
of
I stop the
debugging?
debugger, build should not be grayed out anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, it was grayed out only because I was in the debug session,
Mhm.
and when I'm still in the debug session, it blocks out the other one.
All right.
All right. Cool. All right. So saved by Google again. All right. So I'm gonna keep this one up. You know, I'm not gonna stop the virtual machine. Maybe I should stop it because otherwise I will forget and just oh, it has updates. It has been weeks before, since I last run the virtual machine, so it wants to update itself. I'll let it update. We'll just hide it. All right. So any other questions about the homework assignment? Any questions? Yep.
When is it due?
It's due in a week. The usual time frame for a homework assignment is a week. I don't think it's going to take that much time for you guys to do it. You might want to try different ways of doing it. As I said, you can use a sequence of conditional statements. You can use nested conditional statements. You can also use the ternary operator to get this done. So you might, if you get one way, if you use one way and you get it done, you might want to explore some other ways to get exactly the same thing done, because the whole idea is for you guys to just explore different ways of writing programs in C and C++. So there are definitely different ways to get this done. Okay. Any other questions about the homework assignment?
How do we get to test like different ways?
Yeah, it's going to be tedious if you use if you insist to use code blocks. It's going to be tedious because there's no easy way to repeat the test cases to run this program. Now, so those of you who want to automate the testing process, because I suspect some of you probably want to automate it so that you don't have to hand type everything over and over and over again. If you want to automate this process, unfortunately, Windows may be down already. Oh, I can cancel it. Great. Okay. So I want to cancel this because I'm not ready to go just yet. Actually, I am. So we'll go ahead and close this one. Quit from code blocks. There's nothing you can do in code blocks to basically batch test your program. So you basically have to create the executable, and then in the DOS environment you can write a batch file to do it. So I'll kind of teach you guys how to do it. And the command line is no longer here. I'll just start a new one. So we can just start a new command line, go to the folder. You can also go to the folder and at that time right click in the Windows Explorer, and it can open the CMD file in that folder already. Okay, so there are several ways to do the same thing, so this is just one way to do it. So we'll go to the bin folder where the executable is, bin, debug, there we go. So when you see control.exe, you're in the right folder. So at this point, what you want to do is to write what we call a batch file so that you can batch test your program. A batch file is nothing more than a text file, so you can use Notepad to create a batch file. And I'll just call this test.bat, test.batch. And I'm going to create it. And the content is really just exactly how you would run the program as if you do it by hand. Okay, so you just say control. .exe is not needed in Windows. Okay, if you just say control, it is implied that either it is a batch file or an executable. Since in this case an executable exists, it will go ahead and use the executable. So you just say control 1 2 3 4, control 4 3 2 1, control 1 4 3 2. So you have to kind of come up with your own test cases. I will not give you my final test cases for grading purposes. So you will have to think about how to test your program to make sure that it works in all cases. Okay? Someone may think, but that's kind of mean tag, not giving us all the test cases. Well, first of all, I am mean, and I don't mind people calling me mean. My kids do it all day long, and I don't get bothered much anymore. It's been 10 years, so you kind of get used to it, right? But the second point has to do with when you work as a software engineer, your job does not stop when you're done with programming. You have to do some of your own testing too. So since you wrote your own code, you have to understand how to test it as well. Okay? So that's one part of the exercise, is to come up with your own test cases. And that really is a part of programming. Okay? How to analyze the problem itself and how to come up with test cases and say, okay, did I come up with all the possible ways to test this program? Okay? So what you need to do is to come up with your own test cases, and when you're done, save the file and exit from Notepad. And at this point, all you have to do is to say test.bat, and it will automatically run the program the number of times that you have specified with the parameters that you specify. So in this case, you can see it prints -2 for each and every case because the program does not have the logic to set the maximum, right? So that's why it's always printing out a -2. But when you have your code already implemented, you can cross-check the output of each test case to see that, to make sure that your program gives you the maximum in each case. Is that okay so far? How many people are going to write a program just to generate all the test cases? Okay, well, that's not a bad idea. In industry, people actually do that. Okay, they don't hand generate the test cases. They have specific programs and tools to generate the test cases. So if you're interested in doing that, you can definitely go ahead and generate all the test cases. Any other questions? No questions?
Can this be done from the terminal or the command line?
This is the command line in Windows.
Right, so I mean, I don't have Linux on my Windows machine.
I just did everything in Linux.
Right.
So you can replicate exactly the same process and at least get to this point. So the only thing remaining to do at this point is to go back into code blocks and specify the code to find the maximum of W, X, Y, and Z and store it into maximum. Okay. Any other questions? No questions? Now, just to test this whole process, which we call a workflow. Now, just to test the workflow and make sure the workflow does work, let's go ahead and just do something with this program so that it will give us something that depends on the numbers. So I'm going to go back into code blocks and reopen this project. So we go here, go to recent projects, go to control, and this time I will insert some code that is not finding the maximum. It will do something else. Okay, so this is not the right answer, but I'm just going to do it just so that max has something meaningful to print. So I'll just call it W times X plus Y times Z. Don't do this in your program. If you turn this in, I'll make sure that you get negative points for this. So you save it, you go to build. I think you can either build or you can go to debug. So you can go to build and start the debug process. Okay, doesn't really do anything, but I just want to make sure the executable is created. Now I get back into the folder. The first thing first is to double check and make sure that control.exe is updated. Okay, it is updated from before. I can compare the date of this file with the file of test.bat, and you can see it's more recent, so that means this is the updated executable. So now when I run test.bat, it's going to give me some numbers other than the ones that I saw earlier. So this is the workflow of how to write your code debug it as much as you can in code blocks, but when you feel comfortable, you drop back onto the command line to batch test it. Okay, so you basically run all your test cases again to check against your application, your program. Is that okay so far? Okay, I don't think this project is complicated enough to have to use a revision control program, so I'm not going to talk about it at this point. At a later point, when our programs get more complicated, I will talk about how to use a revision control program, or CVS, or get basically tools like that. But with this particular project, it's not complex enough to really need to use a tool like that. All right. Any questions? So how many people are planning to do this with conditional statements? Ternary operators?
Is there a case line?
Switch is not going to be very helpful in this case. Because a switch can only say if this number is exactly this value, would do something, but it's not based on the scenario of which one is larger and which one is smaller. So a switch statement definitely is not going to be helpful in this case. All right. Any other questions? No other questions? All right. So if there are no questions, I'm going to get out of code blocks in Windows and have my Windows to update and shut down itself. And then we can continue to talk about file operations. Remember that boring topic, file operations? Yeah. So we are now back into input and output using files. And we'll go ahead and start with the classic Hello World program. We are done with what is a file already. So now we can start with the classic Hello World program, which is pretty simple, right? I mean, that's the entire program. But even with a program like this, there are certain things to explain. Okay, there are several things to explain here. The first line is pound include less than stdio.h greater than. So a lot of question is, one of the many questions that people might have is, what does that line actually do? What do you think? Go ahead.
I'm going to include some coding from the program that you have to use. Otherwise, it's not going to run the printf.
Well, technically, this is actually just bringing in another text file so that it is almost as if the content of the file stdio.h is a part of this particular program. Okay, so it's just bringing in whatever text is in stdio into this point here. So the next question is, what is in stdio.h? It is called a header file, and in this context, what it does is it includes what we call the prototype of printf. The prototype of a subroutine or function in C++ or in C is basically just saying, how do we use a particular function? How do we use a particular procedure? So in this case, this line 1 is needed because it will tell the compiler what is the proper way to use printf. And the first part here, this part I don't need to explain, but this part here, I do have to explain a few things about it. The first one is the printf is the name of the subroutine. Okay, all it does is to print. So what is the F stand for? Formatted. Okay, it's print formatted. So this is a very simple thing for printf to do, is just to print something with no numbers, nothing inside. In C and C++, we always use double quotes to quote a string. Okay, whenever you have something in text to specify, you use double quotes to enclose it. Hello world, exclamation point, nothing really, no big deal about it. \n is the line feed character. In other words, we are basically saying print hello world and then open up a new line. End the line and then open up a new line to the next line. And that's what hello world is about. So are there any questions about this particular sample program? Okay, questions? Then we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, these are the steps to compile and run the program, and then line by line explanation of this what the program is. This part here we have talked about a little bit in the previous class. It is called redirection. Redirection is this particular symbol. It basically means whatever this program is outputting, capture it in this particular file. That's redirection. Okay. Did we talk about redirection last time? I think a little bit. Okay. So the output of a program, which normally is displayed on the screen, is now captured in a file. In other words, whatever we are outputting to the screen will now be the content of output.txt when the program is done. Let's go ahead and give it a try. Okay, this is pretty easy to try, so we'll go ahead and try this out. I don't need Notepad anymore, so we can close this. Okay. So I'll just go ahead and test, write that particular program, and I'll just call it printf.cpp. So this is the same program, and we'll do a compile g++ -o printf.cpp. So when you run the program normally without specifying anything, the output is going to what we call standard output, and standard output normally prints to the screen, okay, because it's supposed to be interactive. When you run the program, when you specify the greater than symbol, which is redirection, the output is redirected in this case to whatever you specify here. So it can be just a regular file. Okay, we can say, okay, let's go ahead and capture the output of printf into a file called output.log. So now the program doesn't print anything to the screen because the screen is no longer the output of this program. The output is now redirected to the file called output.log. So now we can check the content of output.log, and it has the content of what is supposed to be displaying on the screen because that is capturing the output of this particular program. So that's what redirection is about. Are there any questions about the concept of redirecting? Would this be useful for testing a program? Yep, go ahead.
You only redirect through terminal. You don't do it like with the program, like with the code.
With the code.
So you run the code, then you took that file to terminal and put it in another folder using the terminal, right?
Redirection applies to the output, the default output file of a particular program. So the default is going to the screen, the console, but if you use redirection, then everything that is supposed to be printed to the screen will be in this file.
But you can only do it through the terminal. Is that
Oh, I see what you mean. The redirection?
yeah.
In code blocks, I think you might be able to specify that as a argument to when you run the program. I'm not 100% sure. But on the command line, you can do this in Windows as well. Yep, go ahead.
Let's say that you redirect something down to output. Is it going to be rewrite the hello world to something else that you
Is rewriting
the output? Let's say that you plan a program to say that hello text word, and you redirect it to output. Was it like erase? Was it replace the hello word with the
Yes.
other word?
Okay, that's a very good question. Okay, the question is, if I change the program a little bit, okay, let's go ahead and change the program. So we'll change it to, let's say it has 3 exclamation points here, okay? So when I recompile the program, I have a new executable. So now the question is, if I rerun this program like this, what is going to happen? And the answer is it will overwrite output.log so that the old content of output.log will go away. So it will be replaced by hello world with 3 exclamation point, and the old content is now gone. Now, if you want to preserve the content that is already in the file and you just want to append to that file, you can do that, you have to use greater than to specify append. So that's one way to, yeah. So it's kind of handy because sometimes you don't want to destroy the content of a file. You just want to add to it. And this is the way to add to the content of a file when you're redirecting. Okay. Now this can potentially be useful for your homework assignment because if you capture, when you run the batch file and you capture all the output to a particular file, you can now compare the output of your program against the actual answer. Just compare those two files row by row, and you say, oh, they look exactly the same. That means your program is probably doing the right thing. Now, if they're not the same, then you know, okay, it's not working for this particular case. You go back to the batch file, find out which case is not working, go back into code blocks, change the argument of the command line in code blocks to reflect the case that is not working. Then you use your code blocks to debug your program line by line, statement by statement, and try to figure out why it is not finding the maximum. Okay. Any other questions about what we have talked about here? Okay. Questions? So the other part that is nice about capturing the output of a program is you can use a text editor and go back in and revisit the output of a program at your leisure. Okay, you can do it slowly, page by page. Okay, you can use all kinds of tools inside the text editor to search for a particular string, a particular pattern, and stuff like that. But if you're doing it on the terminal like this, if it scrolls by, it scrolls by. It's not saved. You can probably use a thumbnail on this side here to scroll up and down, but it's still not very convenient. Okay, so saving the output of a program to a file sometimes is very helpful when it comes to debugging a program. Any other questions? Yep.
I had a question about the program that we had to do. You want us to specify like like in 32 that.
No, you don't have to. You know,
what I'm talking about.
Nope.
Oh.
Nope.
That's
No, I think I know what you're talking about, and the answer is no, you don't have to do it. There's nothing you have to do other than, putting stuff, between the two lines of comment that I have indicated. So that means you're not supposed to modify the types of the variables because that's before where your code is supposed to be located. Yeah, I'm not going to throw anything like, out of range numbers, at your program. It's all going to be fairly small numbers, maybe -10 to +10. That's all I'm going to throw at your program. Yep.
You say when it says write your code under here, you can start with the conditional statement. If you're going to do conditional statement, you have to write main, bold, and all that for that.
You have to say.
You just start with your conditional statement.
Yeah, you just start with a conditional statement. Yeah, main is already done, and the part to parse the argument is done as well. So you start right away with your whatever code you want to use. You can start with a conditional statement if that's what you want to do to implement this program, or you can use an assignment statement if you want to use a ternary operator to do it. You can use a series of assignment statements to do it too. You don't have to use a single one. There are many different ways to approach this particular problem. All right. Any other questions? Okay, if there are no questions, we're gonna. Oh, okay. Here's about piping. Piping is interesting because with piping, which is represented by a vertical bar when you're using the command line, what it does is it's not capturing the output of a program into cat in this case. What this is really doing is there are two commands. Hello is one command, cat is another command. So what we are doing here is we're taking the output of the first command, which is hello world with 3 exclamation points, and feed it to the second command in this case. Cat is not really a very useful command for the most part, but it is kind of an interesting program. So if you want to know what cat does, it's not the animal cat, it is the program cat. You say man cat, and it will tell you what this program does. All it does is to take whatever is the input and put it to the output. It's just doing that. But the concept of piping is very useful in Unix and Linux type of environment, because in Linux and Unix, they have a lot of small little programs, utility programs. Each one doesn't do a whole lot, okay? But by being able to take the output of one program and feed it to the next program, now it becomes a lot more useful, okay? So you can combine different commands using the pipe operation, and basically make a sequence of commands, and together they can accomplish something that is complicated. Okay, so that's what piping is about. WC is a more interesting program. Let me just run WC all by itself, and you can tell me what you think it's supposed to do. This is a test of what WC does. Okay. When you're done with something like this, and you want to say, okay, I'm done typing, you press Control D, and it prints out 3 numbers. What do you think those 3 numbers represent? It just turns out to be powers of 2, but that's just completely coincidental here. Okay, so what do you think 2, 8, and 32 represent?
Line words and characters.
Yep. Number of lines, number of words, and number of characters. Okay, so without specifying anything, WC is going to take what we call the standard input file, which exists for every single program in Linux and Unix, and it will say, okay, give me something to process as the standard input file. But if you don't specify anything, the standard quote-unquote standard input file is just what you type on the keyboard. And that's why it asks me, that's why it's waiting for me to type something. And I type, this is a test of what WC does. When I press the Control D, key, I'm indicating to WC that I'm done. Okay, I'm done typing. End of file. And that's when it starts to process everything and come up with the total number of lines, words, and also characters. Are we doing okay so far with this part?
Is there a reason why the numbers are spaced out the way they are?
I think it uses the tab character, so it tabs by 8 spaces. Okay, so WC is kind of interesting, but what does it have to do with what we're doing here? Well, if I want to do something like okay, let's take the output of printf. If I want to count the number of lines, words, and characters of the output of printf, I have 2 ways to do it, right? The first way is to capture it into an output file and then feed that output file in return to WC. But the second way to do it is even better, because what we can do is to make a connection, a bridge between those 2 programs. So what this is going to do is to say, okay, first run printf, but don't display the output of printf to the screen. Do not capture it in a file either. Send it directly to the next program, which is WC. So when I run it like this, WC is not going to ask me for the input either. It's not expecting the input to come from the keyboard or the console. It is now expecting the input to come from printf, the program printf. Okay. So when I press the Enter key, this is what I see. There's one line of input. There are 2 words, hello world, 2 words. And then there are 15 characters, including the 3 exclamation points. And also the line feed character, I think. No, not excluding the line feed character, but including the punctuations. Hello is HELLO, comma, space, and then world. Yeah, and then 3 exclamation points. Are there any questions about the concept of a pipe? It's basically a bridge between 2 programs. Take the output of this program and feed it into the input of the next program. All right? Yep.
I put WC hello.cpp and it gave me something else. Is it completely different?
Yeah, because okay, this is what you did, right? WC printf or hello, whatever, right? What this does is it will use printf as a file. So it will use printf as a file, and it will perform word count on the file itself. Now printf is an executable file, which means it's not even a text file, so it would give you some really funky output, because you will have probably very few lines, okay, because there are very few end of line characters, but the total size is going to be pretty big. See, it gives me only 2 lines, 55 words, but 5,116 bytes. Okay. That's because you're giving it the entire file to process. Any other questions about the use of a pipe? Questions? All right. And we can move on to the next version, the alternative version of Hello World. Because this is a C++ class, we are now going to use C++ to do the same thing. This part just has to do with when do we spell stream with a lowercase s and when do we spell with an uppercase s. Uppercase means it is a name of a class. We'll talk about the concept of a class much later in this class. So the program now looks like this. Okay, it's a little bit different from what it used to be, and you can still recognize some portions of it. The first difference is the include file is now different. In other words, now we are looking at different files to include in order to tell us what is an IO stream. Okay, and the same file, the same header file IO stream, is also going to define what is cout. So cout is a variable, but it is not one that you have to define because it is already defined in the header file. Okay, so that's why you don't have to worry about, oh, but how do I define cout? It's already done by including IO stream as a header file. Line 3 is kind of like a mysterious one, using namespace std, the standard namespace. If we do not include this particular line, the program can still be used, but we'll have to make modifications. The reason why we have to make the modifications is because the names that are defined in IO stream are in the standard namespace. So in order for the rest of the program to run properly, you will have to use a prefix of std : cout here and std : end line here. Okay, it's doable. It's just very kind of tedious. Okay, when you say using namespace std, it means if cout is not your variable, it will automatically go to the std, the standard namespace, to look for the name cout and end line in this case. So it's a convenience feature. Okay, it is a convenience feature. So the next question is, why do we need namespaces? What is a namespace and why do we need it? Well, the need of a namespace has to do with name collision. A lot of times, different types of programs, different types of libraries tend to use about the same name. So as it turns out, like compare. Okay, if you look at the name compare as a subroutine, it's very common. What are we comparing? Comparing, what kind of type of data? So without the use of a namespace or the namespace concept, then we have a problem, because if someone else is already using the name compare, your code cannot use that name anymore because somebody else has already taken the name. So the use of namespace means, okay, you have your own namespace, I have my own namespace. And in each namespace, we can use exactly the same name. Okay. So you can specify to the compiler and say, oh, this is tags compare, tag : compare, using the compare of tags namespace, or Mickey's namespace. Okay, Mickey : compare. Okay, so assuming that you have your own namespace, that's how you can designate and say, oh, we are not just talking about any compare, we are talking about compare of a particular namespace. But this gives you an idea of how many subroutines are already written in C and C++ that we can run into problems like that. Okay, all the common names are already taken, so you can't really use those common names anymore without the use of namespaces. The rest of this slide or the rest of this document is really kind of just explaining everything that I talked about, except for this symbol here. Okay, this less than symbol basically means, oh, this is the following is what we want to print. Okay, and the components that you want to print, you also separate each one using the less than symbol. Apparently, less than is just a separator. It's just separating the components that we want to print. That's really not the case, but for the time being, we can look at it that way. Okay, but in reality, it's not really acting as a separator. The other part is we don't have a \n anymore, and instead we have a basically a reference to a variable end line. Now, end line is exactly the same thing. It's just a line feed character. Yep.
So if you want to print a variable as well, there just the symbols and the variable at the end.
Yep.
And at the very end of the line, just the semicolon.
Yep. Exactly. That's exactly what the skeleton code of your homework assignment has at the end of the program. It has cout less than max less than end line. Okay. The reason why it uses end line instead of in the previous program a \n is because this is more portable across different operating systems. If I just specify \n, technically it is just a single line feed character, ASCII 10. But ASCII 10 works okay in Linux, but not so much in DOS, and definitely not in Mac OS 10. Because each operating system has its own way to mark the end of a line of a text file. The use of end line here makes it easier to basically say, oh, depending on the compiler environment, end line can correspond to a single line feed character, can correspond to line feed followed by a carriage return, or a single carriage return depending on whether you're using a Mac OS 10 or Windows or Linux. So this is just a more portable way of writing your code. In this particular program, if you want to, you can use the same old way of doing things. \n will still work here. It's just not recommended. It's called deprecated in programming world.
What?
Deprecated, which means it is outdated, not recommended anymore. So I think it's deprecated. Deprecated means express disapproval of, frowned upon, like not really a good idea, but it will still work. Okay, it's just not recommended. We may not support that feature anymore at any given time, and we won't give you any warning. That sort of thing. Okay. Are there any questions about today's lecture up to this point? Okay, let me just kind of finish up this slide here before we go. So the rest of this really just kind of explains what I have explained so far and why we use end line instead of \n. What about redirection and piping? It will work exactly the same way, because redirection and piping has nothing to do with the inside of your program. Those are command line features of what we call a shell. Okay, CMD in Windows is a shell. What you see in Linux, as my terminal, is also what we call a shell. Does anyone know why it's called a shell? And why an operating system has a kernel? No. The kernel is the innermost part of an operating system. It has no way to interact with anyone or anything. Okay? A shell is a layer on top of the kernel. It gives you the minimum way of interacting with the kernel by typing your commands and getting feedback using text. So that's why there's a kernel, which is the inside, has no user interface whatsoever. A shell is wrapping around a kernel to give you minimum text-based interaction. A GUI is on top of that. Okay, so Windows is really technically the outermost shell, which is GUI based, on top of a kernel. All right. So we are running a little bit short on time. I think this class ends at what, 45, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So we are pretty much there. So I'm going to stop today's class. Work on your homework assignment. It is due in 1 week. If you guys have any questions about conditional statements, and need clarifications of those concepts, you can still ask those questions on Monday.
So I had a question.
Yep.
When I go